Hello, this is Module 1 on leadership. This is part of an 8-video series on using the Baldrige model to improve. Leadership on the left side of the Baldrige model is part of what is called the leadership triad. This triad includes leadership, strategy, and customers. Leadership is grouped together with these other items to emphasize the importance of a leadership focus on strategy and customers. Before we talk about leadership, though, I'm going to provide an overview of one of Baldrige's philosophical approaches called ADLI. ADLI is used in all the Baldrige categories except for the results category. It's a way that the Baldrige model frames the thinking about each category and represents the 4 broad factors that Baldrige examiners, who are trained reviewers who help organizations improve, consider when providing feedback. The A in ADLI stands for approach, which is the methods we use to carry out our processes. And processes are the linked activities that provide a program or service for a student or other customer. D stands for deployment, which is the extent to which an approach is deployed. L is learning, which is new knowledge or skills that result from experience or innovation. And I is for integration, which is the harmonization of plans, processes, resources, and the workforce to support organization-wide goals. So for example, let's consider a hypothetical example from a university admission. The approach might be prospective students submit an application online. The application is then routed to the review committee who examines the application and sends a paper letter to the applicant once the student is reached. So that's the approach for how they do admission at this hypothetical university. However, let's say the review committee lost 2 members during the last year, and therefore they were unable to review all the applications. So in this case, the approach would not be considered fully deployed because not all the applications went through this same process. So let's say the university discovered this problem, as you would hope they would, and they increase the size of the review committee to allow for excess capacity to ensure all applications are reviewed in the future. So this is an example of learning about this process and about this approach. And then integration, this is the most complex component of ADLI and requires systems thinking. So in this example, this would mean connecting the university's plans to, say, increase enrollment with this approach, with workforce plans, with resource allocation, and with the success of this approach to ensure achievement of the university's goals. So as we go through the leadership category and the other categories in future modules, we should always be thinking about ADLI. Do we have an approach for this item? Do we have a way we do this? And if we do, is it fully deployed across the unit? Or are there gaps? Is it used in only some parts of the unit? We should also be thinking about if we're learning about the effectiveness of the approach. Is it working in the way we think it should? And if it's not, are we improving it? And we should also be thinking about how the approach connects back to the things we said are important. Our strategic goals, overcoming challenges, and so on. So hopefully you can see here how the order of ADLI is very important as well. You have to have an approach before you can deploy it, and then you have to learn about it. Before you can learn about it, it has to be fully deployed so you can learn about it. And finally, being able to think about integration requires an approach, but also an understanding of what we want to achieve as an organization as well. So be thinking approach, deployment, learning, integration. So let's move into category 1 here, all about leadership. This category is all about how the unit is governed, including demonstrating personal commitment to legal and ethical behavior, communicating with the workforce, students, customers, partners, creating an environment for success and a focus on action, evaluating the performance of leaders, how leaders address and anticipate future and current regulatory and community concerns, how leaders ensure ethical behavior, how the organization makes societal contributions. And as you can see, this is a very long list. I'm not going to cover all of these things because we don't have time, and more importantly, I'm not an expert in all of these areas. But I'll focus on 3 areas that are critical for many units, and they can really make a big difference in success. And those 3 areas are leaders' communication with the workforce, with partners, with students, and other customers, defining the governance system, how a bill becomes law, and creating an environment for success and a focus on action. So let's jump into the first one here. Leaders' communication with workforce, partners, students, and other customers. And remember, as we go through this, we're thinking about approach, deployment, learning, and integration. So the first thing your unit needs to understand is who are your key partners and customers. And of course, who your students and workforce is pretty evident here. The topic is covered in more detail in the module on category 3, which is really about understanding your students and other customers. So we'll dive into some of this much more deeply in that module. For now, though, all you really need is a list of your key partners and customers. So for example, your key customers will likely include students, students' parents, employers of alumni, Those all seem pretty obvious. But you might also consider users of your research, such as educational professionals, as consumers of the research you're producing or customers of the research you're producing. And note that all of these examples here, these are external customers in that they're outside of your unit. You might also consider internal customers. So in many ways, faculty and staff are customers of the unit as well, in that the unit provides training, a workspace, equipment, and so on to help them do their jobs effectively. You should also be thinking about internal customers, such as units within the larger organization to whom you provide a service. So a simple example of this would be an IT department that provides equipment to researchers and other departments to use in carrying out their research projects. There would be an internal customer of providing equipment to those other places. So not all units serve the same customers, and they're not all expected to, so it's important to create your own list here of what fits with your mission and vision for your unit. But it's very important to be thinking about who your customers are, who you serve, and how they connect to what your mission is. You should also develop a list of partners. Partners are a little bit different than customers in the sense that partners have a more collaborative relationship with them than we see for customers. So a good example for a partner for the College of Education is the UI Center for Advancement, which is an internal partner that we work together with to achieve the shared goal of providing resources and funding to support the college's mission. One other thing to think about as you're creating your list of your workforce, your key partners, students, and other customers, you should also be thinking about what's called segmentation. So segmentation are the various subgroups that make up each of the larger groups. So for example, for workforce, you might have faculty and staff, you might have full-time and part-time, you might have in-person employees and remote employees. You might also identify other relevant ways you could think about subgroups of your employees as well. And this is important because as you think about your communication strategies, what might work for one group, say full-time in-person faculty, may not work at all for another group such as part-time remote staff. So now that you're thinking about your segments and you have those sketched out, what you'll do is map out your communication system. So the first column here you can see is for the communication methods, such as an email newsletter or social media channels. The second column is then you will specify the segments of the workforce, partners, students, or other customers that are captured by that communication system or that communication method. You can certainly include more than one segment for each method if it makes sense to do so, and you certainly could have more than one method for each segment as well. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one match there. The third column is for the frequency of the communication, like maybe monthly for a newsletter. And the fourth column should be used to indicate if the communication is two-way. So that's to say if those who receive the communication also have a chance to respond and provide feedback on that message. And then the last column is our good friend learning again, where you can describe how the communication method has been modified to better meet the needs of those segments. So for example, here's a simple example from the College of Education. College leaders, so if we talk about email, college leaders regularly provide email updates about what's happening in the college. These emails go to the workforce, to undergraduate students, to graduate students, to key partners and other customers. Emails are sent at least once a semester and more often if additional updates are needed. It includes possibility of two-way communication as the emails are designed to include a reply to email if recipients have questions or feedback. And as an example of learning, email messages that are sent to non-workforce segments such as students are now copied to the workforce so that the workforce is aware what messages students are receiving from the college. So that's kind of a simple example here of a communication mechanism. As you put together your unit's communication system, you might also consider things like in-person meetings, social media, advisory boards, town halls, and so on that are relevant to the things you do. Moving on here to the second category or the second topic of unit governance. This section is all about how a bill becomes law, which is an important consideration when thinking about organizational improvement. At the broader level, this is really about the process the unit uses for changing its approaches. So if there's going to be a new way of doing things, how does the unit go about making that change and seeing it through? For example, in the College of Education, the governance decisions are made by the dean with support of the executive council, and they receive input from various sources in the college, such as the faculty advisory council, the staff council, the college's advisory board, and they have oversight from the UI's office of the provost. So the major things that executive council decides through this process includes how to support customers, developing, implementing strategy, updating policy, allocating resources, all those sorts of things. So thinking about your area, what does it look like in your area? How are decisions made? Where is there input from various sources? Is there change supported? How is change supported if it is supported? If there's a great idea from someone about how to improve something, how is that implemented? So there's no one right answer to these questions. It's really about the culture in the unit and how the unit is structured and its overall context. And as you think about what the approach looks like in your area, also consider how that approach is deployed. If you use it for just some decisions or most decisions or just a few decisions, and also thinking about if there's any learning you've done about your governance approach as well. Has there been changes you've made to this to make it more effective over time? And how are you tracking that to see about what you're learning about your governance approach in your unit? Okay, our last topic in the module is about creating an environment for success and to focus on action. Now, a big part about creating an environment for success is about the culture of the unit. Peter Drucker said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And why is this? It's because culture is about the way people behave without being told. So culture is about what happens when the boss is gone for the day, when there isn't anyone around to tell people what to do. It's about how people know how to behave and perform without being told. And at the core, culture is about who you are, how you behave, and the relationships that are formed with each other and with those you serve. So in this section, we're going to think about reflecting on our unit's culture a bit. So one way to think about your culture is to think about whether or not you have a proactive culture. So do you have a proactive culture that promotes success and acting? Or is it a culture where people wait around for approval to do what they know is right, or where they wait around to be told what to do? You might also think about the types of environment and the kind of relationships that are formed in your environment. Are they collaborative, supportive, and focused on teamwork? Or are they more competitive, individualized, winner-takes-all situation of teamwork in your unit? In terms of relationship building, is there a focus on building relationships through important celebrations, intentional events, activities to promote positive relationships? Or is it really more of a culture of just keeping your head down, watching the clock till it's time to go home and turn off the Zoom meeting and leave for the day? And finally, thinking about what kind of culture you have for improvement in your unit. So one of the ways that we can think about improvement, there's employees of Mary Greeley Medical Center in Ames say that they have two jobs. Their first job is to do their work, but their second job is to improve their work. So they have this culture of improvement that's infused throughout every unit and through every employee in that hospital. Or on the other hand, you have a culture where there's just a focus on just getting your work done and moving on. So to summarize, there's no single unit culture or approach that's the best, but what's important is to be intentional about the type of culture you want to have in your unit. A positive culture that supports success and improvement is not accidental, rather it requires careful thought and attention and communication with those in your unit to help them buy in and understand the goals of what you're trying to achieve as a unit. So this is the end of the content for Module 1. There's 3 activities that go with this module: the Leadership Communication Plan activity, the Unit Governance and Creating a Culture for Success activity, and Creating an Environment for Success and Focus on Action. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.